Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin.
I did want to let y'all know, if you have been following me and enjoying some of the bit information that we have got, we have a new online course that's being released. It has only been available up till now in a masterclass version that is like 30 hours long. We are now going to release the original 6 modules of that course, which does include the bit video, but a lot of add-ons as well as a 70-page study guide that goes along with the course. We have also included in this self-guided course 2 of the videos from the master class where we had some special guests coming in. So that's something like an extra 4 to 5 hours worth of content for you to watch that I think adds a lot of value to the course and gives you an idea of what the master class would be like if you decided to upgrade to it at a later time. You also, because you've already bought the self-guided part of the course, you won't have to pay full freight for the master class version if you decide to go to it later. If you're interested in checking that out, head over to thebitcourse.com. We will have a link in the show notes to the specific page with the self-guided course if you're interested in more information. At the very least, I would encourage you to get on our subscriber list for the newsletter. I do send out pretty regular emails with some tips and things, and that's not stuff I share on social media. That's all exclusive to this particular newsletter. So anyway, check it out. I think it's well worth your time and money, and it does cover way more than just the dry bit mechanics and stuff you may think it has. It's got a whole lot in there about how to use your hands, how to apply this bit in practical terms versus that bit, kind of the differences between them, the things this is going to help you with versus that. So it isn't just mechanical kind of stuff. It's a lot of very practical information as well. I'm very pleased to be joined today for this Q&A segment with Miss Nicole Shoup. She has Nicole Shoup Horsemanship in Ohio. She is teaching a horsemanship class for the Ohio State University at their Agricultural Technical Institute campus. She is also a Best Horse Practices board member. That is where I met her some years ago, and she is a young and upcoming horse trainer that's got a good social media presence and a lot of good information out there to offer you. I asked her to come on here and help me with the Q&As where she would kind of read the questions, and that way we can have a little more of a back and forth, and hopefully it's a little more of an organic situation, a little more interesting to listen to than just me droning on and on and on, doing it all myself. So Nicole, thank you very much for taking time out of your day and joining us.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, what have you got for me? Let's get going.
Okay. So first question is going to be about desensitization. So I condensed this to, there are many whys and hows when it comes to desensitizing. Some common things we might encounter on the trail with our horses would be like hikers, bicyclists, blowing plastic bags, flock of birds goes flying, big flock of buzzards, brown wasps, deer, and balloons stuck in the bushes. So the question is there a correct or best way to prepare my horse and myself for encountering these things?
So I'm going to answer this a little more technically than I ordinarily might. Technically, what we tend to mean when we say desensitization isn't what desensitization actually is. So what desensitization actually is training an animal to diminish their natural response to a specific stimulus. So let's say you had a horse with a particular aversion to the little plastic Walmart, Dollar General bags or something like that. If you specifically worked on that bag with that horse to redirect their reaction or response to that stimulus, then that would technically be desensitizing. That's really not what we're doing 95% of the time when we're working with a horse. I really like the perspective that I've heard from Jordan Peterson on this as a psychologist working with people who are agoraphobics. And agoraphobics are like the Howard Hughes who became a shut-in, and they're afraid of everything to the point that
Okay.
it paralyzes their entire life. And if you can work with those people and get a toehold with them where they start trying one thing and another, what happens is that they don't become less fearful, they become braver. And that is really what we're trying to accomplish with our horse. It is about them being able to regulate their nervous system. I think in a great part of that, it is about their bond and trust in you as an individual handler of the animal. And I'm going to get into that a little bit deeper in just a second too. So one of the examples that I like to give there, this is one of the harmful things about the marketing stuff of clinicians. There are some of them that have their special stick, and there's, all this little tool bag kit that you need to buy in order to desensitize your horse correctly, and yada yada yada. The reality is, when we look at it in this perspective of not resolving fear but instead increasing bravery, we are way more effective if we were to show the horse 50 different scary things twice than if we showed them the same two scary things 50 times. Okay, so desensitization again would be that specific instance of, like, if a person had a fear of spiders, arachnophobia, and we worked with that person on being able to tolerate spiders. That's what desensitization would be. That's not what we want in a horse. We generally want them to handle a variety of different things in a manner in which they are controllable. I think one of the really big mistakes we tend to make, I see this a lot with people training their own horse. They are what I call a tiger on the ground and a lamb in the saddle. So they'll be real brave and real assertive and real aggressive on working that horse on the ground, sometimes too much so. And
Yeah.
then none of that carries into the saddle. So if you're going to flag a horse on the ground and you don't also bother to flag them while you're in the saddle with a flag in your hand and they handle that, you did a third of the job and skipped 2/3 of the job. That's really the point at which you're vulnerable, and you need that animal to handle themselves and, again, be braver, not less fearful.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing I said about that was the relationship with you. This is also the kind of thing I don't find to be that transferable, at least not initially. And so, like, we have this movement now. I'm actually working on a kind of involved post on this, on the quote unquote debunking of dominance theory and
Yeah.
leadership and all of this stuff. It depends on the semantics of exactly what you mean by dominance theory or leadership, whether we're talking about the research paper version or the version that's actually out in the world and that people are practicing. But it's completely self-evident that one person can work with one horse and develop a relationship, and that horse will do just about anything that person asks. And then you can take another person and bring them into the same horse, and now they can't cross the ditch that the other person has been across 1,000 times with the horse. So to say that leadership and that development of a relationship of trust with the horse doesn't exist because some research paper says it doesn't it's a true perversion of that idea, that it's self-evidently not true. So
I'm going to back up a little bit and just ask you to discuss a little bit about, if you're thinking of that scenario of I'm exposing the horse to those 50 things, how do I know, in your experience, how do you know when it's time to move on to the next thing, and whether or not that horse has accepted the blue grocery bag versus the feed sack around their legs or their body or whatever it may be?
that's a very good question. So certainly the easiest to talk about and most prolific form of quote desensitization is advance and retreat. So that means I'm going to use this stimulus, and that's really how I want to think about it. So it doesn't matter what the thing is. It could be the bag, the flag, the rope, into your lead rope, whatever the thing is. I'm going to read that horse's body language, and I'm going to push on that horse's bubble with said stimulus. For one horse, that might mean touching them quickly. For another horse, that might mean got within 8 feet of it. You really have to just watch the horse and see what's going on there. I'll also say here, there's kind of this new notion of threshold. And so that would be if I overstimulate the horse and I get too big of a response, then I crossed his threshold. That could be a long discussion in and of itself. What I will say is that's a pretty subjective description, and there's a whole lot of that just comes down to experience. I would say that I could put way more pressure on a horse quicker than most people and still be successful in the end, because that's a lot more tied to the ability to read the horse in those little microseconds and your timing and all of those sorts of things. I would say one of the worst things you can do is tiptoe around a horse and be a little too respectful of their bubble. And I've seen plenty of instances where a horse got sensitized in a case where they were trying to desensitize. So if I took, let's say, the rope, the bag, whatever, I go to touch the horse on the wither area in the back, and he starts dancing around and kind of running in circles around me. As soon as he slows down, that's when I retreat. I withdraw. Doesn't have to be stopped. It just has to be some progress in my direction. Now, the second time, I might be a little more careful about how quickly I bring that toward them, and maybe they dance around half as much. I'm really pretty analytical about that. I will count steps, or we made 3 revolutions this time and we only made 1 revolution the second time. That's significant progress. And so that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. I tend to break desensitizing up quite a bit. So I don't expect to get 100% of the desensitizing done today on this horse with this object. I expect to see significant progress, and then I'm going to work on that again tomorrow, and then again the next day, and then again the next day. One of the things we pretty commonly see, and there's a technical example for this too. So in the jargon, we would call it flooding. And that is kind of I'm going to tie this horse up in the alley and run cattle back and forth and back and forth and back, and he's just going to get eventually used to it. That is, I would say, kind of a technique of last resort. It is an inarticulate way of describing things to the horse. There's going to be a percentage of horses that will come out on the backside of that okay. There's going to be a percentage of horses that are never again going to be good with that situation. And so if I'm on the ground with the lead rope and a flag or something like that, I am in control of how much stimulation I put on that horse. I can read where that threshold is, whether I put too much pressure or not enough. I would also say all of us make mistakes in our assumptions there. If you aren't sometimes regularly using a little too much pressure, you're probably not ever using quite near enough pressure to actually accomplish the thing. So crossing the threshold is not that big of a deal. It happens to horse trainers daily. Like if it's always happening. You misjudge something a little bit. That's part of how you learn about the horse. It's part of how they learn to trust you, because I overdid it. Sorry about that. This time I didn't. Oh, this guy sees me. He understands. He's working with, it's part of building rapport. And so I think people need to cut themselves a little bit of slack right there. If you're never crossing a horse's threshold, or dogs or whatever, you are probably not being very productive either. You're being way too conservative. I see this all the time where people take 6 months to accomplish something they could have accomplished in 10 minutes if they had just pushed a little bit more.
And this leads into a follow-up question with this as well. I don't know what kind of this question had come from the group and what that person's skill level is, but you made a comment earlier about if you're trying to, I like to say, like, teach the horse to like manage their fear, manage their response. And so if you're going to expose that horse to that new thing, what skills or relationships should you have with your horse beforehand, and how are you sure that you're not going to make it worse? Because there are some things that we might advise someone to go do, and all it takes is bad timing, and now the horse is more afraid of the bag than they were when you first produced it in their space. So thoughts on that?
So the word you said there was the key one, was timing. If you really think about it, the only difference between desensitizing and sensitizing is the timing of your release. That's all that there is. In both cases, I'm applying a stimulus. I'm waiting for a response that I like, and then I remove the stimulus when I get the response that I like. That is negative reinforcement textbook. The response could be you move your feet more. The response could be you move your feet less. So the only difference is when I release. If your timing is poor and you're a little bit late on things, that is going to be one of the biggest holdbacks and impediments to your success that you can have. I often tell people, like, if there's one thing that you could go to work on to improve your horsemanship greatly, it's your timing. No question. You could have all the theoretical knowledge in the world, and if your timing stinks, you are going to not be very successful. And you could have no knowledge of how the science of any of this works, and if your timing is good, you're still going to be successful. I did mean to mention this a minute ago, and I thank you for asking this question in the way you did, because it kind of brought up the organization of this. But if I'm going through this process with a horse, first of all, I don't need to know the horse at all. We don't need a 6-month rapport built or anything. You could hand me a horse in an arena in front of a crowd, and this is the first 5 seconds I've ever met him, and I could start right away. So this is how I would build rapport with a horse. I don't have to have rapport to start. So the two things I'm looking for, one is that they begin to tolerate the thing, and their body language will show me that. Slowing down or stopping when I initially caused you to squirt off a little bit means you're starting to tolerate the thing. And in a couple minutes, I'm going to touch you with the thing, and you're going to be standing there like a statue. So I would say that is kind of stage one. This is also one of the big mistakes I see people make, is they, especially young trainers, it's an almost predictable stage of being a young trainer, that you figure desensitization out, advance and retreat, and you start to get really impressed with yourself and what, I can stand in the saddle and crack a bull. If I could start a chainsaw and he just stands there.
Yep.
Sometimes, especially if you're not really, really adept at reading horses, what you have actually taught the horse to do is to hide in the freeze response, which is on the fight or flight end of the sympathetic nervous system. And the only problem with that is that they can go, freeze is right before fight or flight. So I can teach a horse to kind of bottle up a whole lot of bad energy without moving. That's preferable to blowing up, but it's also right before blowing up. So if I'm not actually getting the horse to release tension and relax and show me those signs like licking and chewing, taking a deep breath, blinking with the third eyelid, which is a big one, just blinking typically with 3 blinks, ears relaxing, head lowering, all of those sorts. If I'm not getting those kinds of signs, then it's a really good bet that I'm actually teaching my horse to freeze and not to regulate their emotions and all of that the way that I want. And the difference there is whether I have a horse that is still responsive or whether I have a horse that is still reactive. So for that reason, the second step of this, beyond tolerance, is that I need a horse that is still responsive. So if, let's say I use my flag on my horse and I get where he'll stand there and he'll let me swing the flag and touch him on the back or something like that, can I also now do that and bring his front end over to the right and then back to the left? Do I still have the ability to control him and affect his feet while said scary thing is happening? For most people, the answer there is no. And so that's the really important part of quote unquote desensitizing. It's not that, again, my horse isn't scared. It's that he's brave and still under my control, because something is going to happen to you out there in the wilds that you could not have possibly prepared for. A moose is going to come out, whatever it may be. And then you need a horse in that instance, not that isn't scared, but that will still stop or turn left or whatever the thing is, so that y'all don't go off a cliff together when he comes out of freeze. I cannot emphasize that nearly enough. So I use tarps a lot. I will have a colt running around with I put the tarp in the loop of my lariat. I'll wrap that around the saddle horn. He's going around the round pen, dragging this tarp, blowing like a ghost or something 10 feet behind him. I can pull on the rope and suck that up into the saddle. And then I expect to just take 2 steps back, and he should still face up and look at me and give me his attention, not stop and sniff the tarp. There's a very big difference between those two things. One could be a freeze response. The other is a horse whose attention I still have and I can control.
I think these are good points. And that leads me to another follow-up question, which relates not only to a message that I received from a client this morning, but also it relates to some of the points that we have in the initial context of the question, which is, my client was riding down, we have a asphalt bike and buggy trail up here. And so it's long, it's straight, and it's flat. And oftentimes you can see a far distance. Sometimes you can't. But she was riding her horse, and there was a kid coming towards them, probably 200 yards off, cantering a horse towards them. So her horse is head up and frozen. So this is a question we have a lot, where you're talking about, can I still influence the horse whenever the scary thing is happening? I feel like there's an element to knowing that it's going to happen and what you need to do as you feel it brewing. But also, what do you do when that horse does get to that frozen spot? Do we let them stay frozen? Do we not let them stay frozen?
Okay, so I kind of have 3 rules of groundwork, and I hate these alliteration things that people come up with, the 7 things you need to do when, and all. It's like a cover of Cosmo magazine or something. Take our quiz. But I have 3 rules of groundwork. The first of them is something I don't hear talked about very often, and to me it is absolutely the most foundational thing that we can do with the horse to keep ourselves safe, and that is getting the horse's attention. Every wreck I've ever been in, the thing that happens right before the wreck is that I lose the horse's attention. Their mind goes somewhere else. I think people need to, I'm even going to say obsessively, be concerned with where their horse's attention is. It's one of those things, like more experienced horse handlers, I can lead a colt around and he can be behind me on my right side a couple of feet, and even while I'm walking forward, I know where that colt's mind is. I can tell when he leaves me through the lead rope and that kind of stuff. And that's just because I am hyper aware of that, because I know I need to be. That is a big time safety. The most in danger people are the people who are oblivious to what's going on with their horse. They're standing there and the horse leaves them, and they don't notice it, much less do anything about it. So you need to treat that like a skill. You need to always be testing your horse in controlled circumstances and working on, can I get your attention back on me right now? And then secondarily, can I also affect and control your feet? So if I were in that situation, I'm on this horse, his attention has left me, he's locked on to the person cantering toward me 200 yards away, I would say the first thing to do immediately is get that horse's attention back on you. Now, in this instance, depending on how affected my horse is, like, this is probably not a time where I'm going to pull on the right rein and start circling them, because if I take their eye completely off of that horse, that freeze response I had a minute ago may turn into full on fight or flight. But if and again, it would depend somewhat on context. I don't know if you've got a fence or a cliff or whatever may be going on, but But if I could put my left leg on my horse and side pass him 15 feet off of the trail, and now we're looking at this other horse coming and he's not dead on. It's horses are good at reading angles and body language. Now he's obviously going to pass us unmolested. I have both done something to engage my horse's attention back on me. I have removed him directly out of the path of harm that he might be worried about. And I have also moved his feet and gotten him out of the freeze response. So you're probably way better off trying something like that. Again, for a lot of situations, I might pull on a left rein or something and do 3 or 4 circles. If I have something coming at me like a missile, though, that's probably not the time to take their eyes off of that thing. When you get them turned around, you're likely to be at a high rate of speed all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So does that adequately answer that question?
Yes, I think it does. So maybe let's go into a little bit of how we can use our friends' solid horses to go out on these trails and have good experiences, or thoughts around, should you take your horse out alone first or with groups first? How much are they going with that group? How much are they going with you? I like to think of it as crutches. Like, a crutch is not meant to be forever. A crutch is something you're going to eventually get rid of. But is there a time and place that you would use a crutch like that to help your horse be exposed?
Very good question. So as far as crutches go, there's some context to that. So I'll just say my kind of regular pattern with starting a colt is that we're going to do about 3 or 4 days in the round pen, and then we're going to kick the gate open, ride a day or two in the arena, and then we're going to head out into the pasture, the trails, or whatever. I'm always doing that by myself. I kind of like that because I feel like it helps me with that attention thing. There's just me there to focus on. I don't have to compete with this other horse or whatever. That being said, I'm probably a little more comfortable with most of the situations you're going to encounter out there than most people are. As far as riding with a group, the most important thing there, in order for that to be successful and helpful, is that you're riding with the right group. So if you're out riding with friends and you're on a green horse, or may not be a green horse, but maybe it has some specific problems, there needs to be a spoken out loud, not an assumption made within that group, that your horse has some trouble and you may need to pause here and work on this or whatever, and they need to be aware of and respectful of that. Meaning if your horse doesn't want to cross this creek, the 4 people you're with don't leave you and take off, and now your horse just becomes this huge ball of anxiety, and when they cross that creek, it's like they just jumped a 10-foot fence, and maybe you make it through that and maybe you don't. So I would want to ride with a group of people that have that understanding. I can trust them. We're not on the kind of thing where we're racing to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. They're perfectly fine with stop and wait, whatever I might need them to do, or I'm fine with whatever the other person might need to do. So I would find that to be more of a stimulating ride than a typical very calm, collected trail ride that most people might want to go on, because it gives me something to do and think about and play with while we're out there. I like to play a game when we do clinics, and this goes from colt starting to most of the formats that I do. We play a game called Buzz the Tower. And basically that is, if we'll just envision some big arena and like 10 people on horses in there, we all spread out as much as we can, and we'll pick one person and they start riding around the arena, kind of interweaving between the horses, but staying as far away as they can. So if you go between 2 horses, you go in the midpoint, you don't go 5 feet from one of them. And we increase the complexity of that game. First of all, if we have a horse, the horse we're going to send out there is usually one of the steadier horses. If we've got a particular horse that is antsy about that, then we're going to methodically play with that horse. We're going to try to get find where the bubble is. We're going to stay on the outside, and then we're going to try to shrink the bubble. So we don't want to be just like the desensitizing we talked about earlier. We don't want to be overdoing it and crossing threshold so much. That being said, if that horse needs to move its feet around, we can allow that. They could try to circle right there or something, and then the person buzzing the towers goes to another area and comes back 5 minutes later. We want to get that game. The way we progress it is you're making the circles smaller and smaller where they are now passing beside you, and we're going to in fact give each other high fives and things, so they'll be that close. So we're going to work on that horse coming at you at a canter from 200 yards down the trail and in fact high-fiving you as they go by, and that is something you need to prepare your horse for. Your horse also needs to do that to other horses where there's a horse standing still, and your horse will go right by there. The riders have the responsibility of reading the horse that they're on, and so if a horse kicks out or something, that's on you, not on the horse. So you need to again be aware. If you have the pissy mare that pins her ears at everybody and squeals, you have maybe a little more responsibility and duties to tend to than somebody on the gelding who's just could care less.
And so what do you do if that horse kicks out? Yeah, the rider, you're riding a horse that kicks out at the other horse.
So if it all comes back to what I was talking about, if you're on the mare and she pins her ears and kicks out at the other horse, where was her attention? Was it on you? It was not on you. And so you basically, this is really, it's kind of the whole deal about punishment and the moral side of things that we want to argue about sometimes. You need to be pretty damn important to your horse. If you're not, you're in danger. Period. Full stop. There is no easier way to say that or whatever. There are going to be competing motivations out there in the world. You need to be more important than all of those motivations. If you know that you aren't, you had better get to working on that right now. I'm going to say here, maybe the most extreme example that we could have with this would be stallions, right? Stallions are not any different than any other horse in the wild. They get along with everybody. They do their thing. We tend to treat them differently when we get them in barns and stuff like that. But a stallion should be able to play buzz the tower just like any other horse should. It should be able to ride right behind the mare and not pay attention to that mare, because if I'm in control of him and I'm riding him, his attention should be on me. And that's really what the root of all of the other problems are. Stallions do tend to require more time to work through that and get in their head enough where you are the most important thing going on, but it generally is certainly doable. I've done it with tons of them. I'll even play this by myself here at the ranch. I'll have 3 or 4 colts or problem horses, and let's say I got 4 of them. I'll have 3 of them saddled and hobbled in the arena, and I'm riding the 4th. And so as I'm working on circles and things, I am buzzing the tower with these other horses. And then the one I was riding, I get off and I hobble him and I go get on one of the others. And that's stallion. That's just whatever I've got in training at the moment. So stallions are as integrated in that as anybody else. And that is how you just turn a horse into a solid citizen. If you go through that process, you're not going to have the horse that has to lead or won't lead, or, they pick their favorite position within the pack or whatever. That to me that's kind of that failure of leadership. Other things are more important than you, if you're telling me that situation is what's going on. So the root of that problem is your importance, the rapport you have built with that horse.
Yes.
I think it's just simple as that.
Yes. And I think that kind of sums up the answer to this question, and also reminds us that one of the things we're looking for isn't always so much the stopping of the feet whenever you're exposing whatever, or those sorts of things. You're looking for that attention. The attention is the behavior that you are looking for in all the things that you encounter. And how you get that attention is different in a couple different ways, whether you're using hands, legs, body position with the eyes, that sort of thing. So that's my little summary comment, because I think we can probably move on from that question unless there was anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, let me say to that point, it's actually quite important that there isn't a answer to that. There are many answers to that. The how I'm going to do this. I want you to do this in a variety of ways. You don't, my left leg is just as important as my right rein or my right leg or my seat moving forward or my seat. All of my, it's me that's important. So I see people, they'll get into a pattern every time they have a problem. It's a left-hand circle. Well,
yeah,
the solution to your problem isn't left-hand circle. The solution is horse pays attention to me. So I actually kind of have a mantra about that when people ask about how do I go about this. The most base thing that it boils down to is that you change something. It does not matter what you change. You just have to change something. That could mean go faster, go slower, go right when you were going straight, but something needs to change right now, like a light switch went off. And that change is what's going to bring their attention back to you. And that's the deal. It isn't really important what you change, what tool you use. Those are kind of the minutia details. The big picture is attention on you, change something to get attention on you. Simple as that.
I think that works. So we're going to switch some gears. And so the context of the question is, I have a client horse in my life who has been ridden primarily in a Tom Thumb bit. The horse has some resistance issues on the trail, including not passing a scary log. The horse has largely overdeveloped temporalis muscles on the forehead and rides with a high head and stiff neck drawn back. The rider has pretty good balance and rides mostly with one hand and has ridden for most of his life as well. So, and this is a probably middle-aged person. So the question is, how can I determine what bit would be the best fit for this horse and rider pair, considering the mechanics of the Tom Thumb is likely contributing to this inverted posture?
So a few things here. One, Tom Thumb, I almost never try to use, I try not to use common names with bits, particularly as we have an international audience. A Tom Thumb is not the same thing all around the world. So I'm going to assume when you say Tom Thumb, what you were referring to is a single jointed, straight shanked, relatively low leverage bit. That would be something different in Australia. So just so that we're defining the same bit, we're talking about an actual shanked bit. It is not a snaffle. A single jointed mouthpiece is not what makes a bit a snaffle. It is the cheeks that make it a snaffle. So a Tom Thumb in this context is a leverage bit.
Should I pull up a photo of what I'm referencing?
Sure.
And that way we can see that visual as well.
Yep. I will say it is one of the worst choices of bit that you could possibly make. Any single jointed shanked bit is very, very likely to cause problems with the horse. The main reason that single jointed shanked bits tend to cause problems with a horse is when you pull back on both reins, you are going to form somewhat of a point with that bit, and you are then, as the shanks come back, you're going to rotate that point forward down into the tongue and into the center line of the tongue where the lingual nerve resides. So as I'm real big on reading body language of horses, particularly with regard to bits, the vast majority of the time, somewhere in the 80% range, the vast majority of the time when I see a horse ridden with a single jointed shank bit, it is a pretty ugly picture. I have a specific use for that type of bit. I use it in the transition stage. I tend to use it with kind of my lower third of horses, the ones that are a little more dumb or a little more problemed, and I can't change very much at a time. I have to really be methodical and take things slow. Some horses you could kind of skip some steps and they're going to handle it and move down the road. Some horses you can't. So with that type of horse, I will use a bit like this. I ride it in two hands and I'm still mostly just one rein at a time. And I get them used to the feeling of the curb and the pole pressure that the leverage bit adds, and I get them acclimated to it. And then as soon as I have accomplished that, I get them out of that mouthpiece into something else. A lot of people will ride with this mouthpiece for a long time, and that in and of itself, it just is a bad design. It has flaws in it in terms of working with the anatomy of the horse. It's not one that I recommend, even though it's one of the most popular designs as far as sales and ownership go. So I have found in that context, if I ride it one rein at a time, I don't have too much trouble. If you go to 2 reins at a time, it's close to guaranteed as you can get.
Right. Especially if you're going to do an opening rein, correct? Because we have the rotation that's also going to be poking into the face. Because I think this is something to consider, is that a lot of these people who might be using this bit are wanting to use it like a snaffle bit.
So that is actually how I use it. What I will say is I'm using it on a horse that is already yielding to me quite well. So there's not a wrestling match going on. I'm not having to dramatically change the side of the bit or anything. And so nothing I'm going to do will be offensive or painful to the horse. If, like, people tend to call this a training bit and things like that, this is not. If you are going to manhandle a horse in this bit or have any kind of a frustrating wrestling match, it's going to go downhill very, very quickly. There's just no question about it. So if I don't think I could successfully transition out of the snaffle into it without that happening, I'm simply not ready to leave the snaffle. It's just that, the snaffle should be where I have my reins in 2 hands and I move my pinky a little bit on the right rein and I get lateral flexion just like that. There's no wrestling match involved at all. And so if I'm there, then I can safely transition. If I'm not there, I have no business transitioning. That's not the horse's fault at that point. That's me making bad decisions and the horse is showing me the consequences. So what you're describing, temporal muscles overdeveloped, neck that feels like concrete, head's too high, like this is the recipe of how you create that. You put the wrong type of bit in the horse's mouth, you cause them pain, you have to pull on them more than you should, and they brace against you and they go into self-protection mode, and that's what you're seeing at that moment. What I would tend to say is that horse probably is unprepared for that bit. He really should be in a snaffle instead. If I were going to rehab it, that's what I would do. I would go to a single jointed snaffle bit, and then I would start back to working on lateral flexion and getting that horse to soften in its neck and poll and all the places that it needs to soften. And probably that's going to take a few months because you have wrinkles in the brain you've got to iron out and put new wrinkles in its place. You're not dealing with a blank slate at this point. You're having to erase knowledge or convince them an answer they think is correct is actually wrong, and in fact the answer is this. And so that's kind of an unfortunate but very common situation. So I would go back. The single jointed mouthpiece in a snaffle cannot rotate, mechanically incapable of rotation. And so it's difficult to get most people to understand how significantly different a single jointed snaffle and a single jointed shank bit are. They are a universe apart. One is one of the best, easiest choices you can make. One is one of the worst choices you can make. And the mouthpiece looks the same. So how am I to know? So anyway, I don't know if you were talking also about a stump. So
well, I have a feeling the posture is contributing to a lot of resistance to everything. So
the stump is not the bit has nothing to do with the stump. The stump is all the other stuff. So
yes. Yeah. So you have this horse that's been being ridden in this bridle, in this bit setup. So you take him out of that bit and you put him into a single jointed O-ring snaffle. You teach the rider how to use that. Would you have any concern with that rider then taking that horse out, maybe before it's soft enough in the new bit, and there being any concerns regarding the horse? He's no longer under pain compliance. Do we have concerns of running through the bit or getting more and more resistive because now we don't have the same level, or do you find that they respond differently? What's the common response, would you think?
Both are possible.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on the horse. Generally, if the worse the horse is, the more the rider's control was done through pain compliance.
I
And
see.
those horses, usually we don't need to go back out on the trail. We probably need to go back to a round pen or something, because you really need to turn loose of them, and generally they need to burn off some steam, and that's a whole lot safer just to put the reins down and ride them for 30 circles at a fast canter in the round pen than it might be in the Rocky Mountains. Right. So
Yeah.
that's generally what I would do if things are pretty bad. If that horse is where your seat still operates and the rider wasn't like in contact, tight rein all the time, and they could still kind of minorly pick up on the reins and affect the horse, then going to the snaffle's probably not going to be as big a deal, and you're really not going to see a big loss of control. So it's really kind of a question of degree.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. What you ultimately should always have is the ability to pick up a rein and have the horse relax. If you're at a point where you pick up a rein and the horse's tension and anxiety levels rise, it should be full stop right there. There's no more competition. There's no more until you resolve that. That horse is not, I hate what this word has become, but when you pick up on the rein, that needs to be a safe space. That horse needs to not flinch or have an anxiety type reaction to that. This is one of the things, I don't know, Nicole, if you ever done this or not with customers, but when I kind of started these video lessons, that was pre-Zoom and all of this being popular. So what I used to do was you film yourself riding for 20 minutes and then send me the video, and I would put it in a video editor and watch it like that. And an unintended consequence was there were lots of times where I'm slowing the video down to like 1/10 speed and watching it. And you would see that when the rider is picking up the reins, that horse actually does a micro flinch. Their eyes close. They're like, you could just see them go, "Oh no," for a brief second. It's a little too fast for you to see without slowing the video down. But then once I started seeing that, I started seeing it everywhere, like everywhere. And there's some competition events I can't watch anymore because that's all I see is that horse go, "Oh no." And so that's the real problem. If your horse goes, "Oh no," when you start to pick up on the reins, I don't care what other problem you're having, that's the real problem. You have to be able to pick up the reins and they're comfortable. It's like your spouse's hand. Your husband can reach down there and grab your hand and you're cool with it. Some stranger in the mall does the same thing to you, probably very different reaction, right? So that's kind of the deal you're looking for. You picking up those reins needs to be a comfortable experience for the horse. If they're bracing or tense or anxious at all when you do that, full stop. That's where you need to work on the problem right there.
Okay. So what would you do if you present this process and this information to the student, whether you're in a clinic setting or whether this is a regular student for you, and they maybe aren't willing to go to the snaffle bit or take that time, but they don't want to ride in the bit that they're in anymore? Maybe this isn't so much a question of what to do. It's almost maybe like a moral question. I'm not sure. But would you recommend a different style of curb bit that the horse could be more comfortable with, even though we know that we're still missing those foundational pieces in the snaffle bit? But I think what I'm getting at is it's just so common that to ask people to back up that far is really scary and they don't want to. And so how do we keep them safe with their horse, and their horse being more comfortable? Because I know, to me, I would want to go back to that foundation. I would almost require it if it's going to be my student. But I do wonder, what if they said, "No, I don't want to do that"?
So I'll say that we're kind of full on into the bit consulting stuff here, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, probably 3/4 of the time when people approach me with bit problems, I actually don't suggest them changing bits.
Okay.
That's a like, if we're gonna go back to the snaffle, I'm gonna kind of put you in the rehab. You're in a more severe segment here. It's not superficial. You really need to back up.
Yeah.
So most of the time, the corrections that I tend to make are going to be with adjustment and some of those things that no level of skill can overcome. Like if I have a bit on my horse that's too narrow, it does not matter if I have the best hands in the world. I can't help the pain that the bit's causing because it fits poorly. But when we get beyond that, the most common suggestions I make are actually with how the rider uses their hands. Like if you gave me only a snaffle bit, I could still do 99% of what I do. I wouldn't really feel that handicapped. There are certain designs that lend themselves more to some things, have strengths and weaknesses, but the reality is the hands on the reins mean more than the bit does. So unless they really have something inappropriate to what they're trying to do, I wouldn't make a big fuss over it. It's kind of the same with the horse. Unless I really feel like things are bad and like I'm willing to not work with you, but that's a pretty rare situation. If I push on you too much, you're going to get defensive. And if you get defensive, you don't have a prayer in helping that horse anymore. So it's a little better if I just go with the flow. My number one exercise for this, and really if people would understand this and follow it, like the bit side of my business would be out of business next week because none of these problems would exist and people would be able to solve them. Regardless of the type of bit that you're riding with, the most common problem maker is people pulling on both reins at the same time too much, both too hard and too frequently. And the solution to almost all of these problems, regardless of the bit in the horse's mouth, is to instead pull on one rein and get the horse to soften laterally and pick up that rein so slow, you just can't imagine how slow it is. One of the weird things about horses is that they are actually, that bracing response, we tend to bring it out most by simply being too quick with our hands. It isn't really about the pressure, it's about the speed. They didn't see you coming and you surprised them and they brace. And then that becomes a pattern. If you will just slow down, you can actually take that horse that doesn't want to turn right, and I can slowly pick up on the rein, take the slack out, make contact, pull a little harder, get to where I'm pulling really, really hard. I can do that without causing them to brace up. It's not how hard I'm pulling, it's how fast I get there.
I see.
So if I need to pull hard slowly, I can actually relax a horse that way. The slowly is the important part. So, and then again, like we talked about with the desensitizing, the timing of the release. I'm going to share with you a tip I think I have talked about a time or two, but not very often. And this is really like a little secret weapon. I've almost been tempted to gatekeep this one and only put it behind paywalls and stuff. But this is something I've never heard anybody talk about, and it is a superpower. If you are needing to laterally soften a horse, one of the very best things you could do is look at that horse's eye. And let's say I'm in a little circle to the right. Most of the time, if I have a braced horse, I'm going to see the white of the back of the eye. He's looking out and away. And remember how we talked about where his attention is. Even if he's soft, his mind is not with me. If I will wait until he actually looks at me in that circle and then I release, like do that 10 times in a row, and you're going to be on a different horse. Like, it doesn't take much. But the same thing you could do when you're on the ground. If I'm standing there and he's in a halter and I want to teach lateral flexion and soften him, wait until he looks at you and release. And it just I mean, their mind opens up. It's like a key to a lock. I've seen a lot of horses that were bronchi, problem horse types. There was a dressage lady that I worked with. She was actually an instructor. This was a clinic just for the instructors at this place. She's one of the more experienced people there. And she's got this dressage level, third level dressage horse, so kind of advanced, right? So you talk about resistance. When she's a very experienced lady, she's probably 10 years older than I am. She's on a horse she's pretty proud of, but he still has some runoff moments. And here I am asking her to walk little circles until he looks at you. And she was kind of resistant. It took me maybe 10 minutes to like convince her and get her into this. And that was all she did with me the first day. Next day, totally different horse, like totally different horse. Like she couldn't believe how big of a difference. She'd been working for 2 years on this and had never gotten him this calm and relaxed and mind on her after just doing that little exercise for a day. So where their attention is matters, and where their eye is also part of telling you where their attention is. There's tons of horses that are not super comfortable with people coming right up in their face. That we see this all the time, that the owner, let me give you a hug and kiss you on the nose, and the horses stand there with half pinned ears, and they're tolerating the person, but anybody that really reads horses knows this horse is not enjoying this right now. It's kind of that, like, you're too much up in their face. They actually, the way their eye works, I don't want to get into all that here, but they can't focus at all within about a 2-foot bubble of their head. When you get within that bubble, they can't really see you with any detail anymore. And you're now a fuzzy blur. That's why those whiskers are important, because they can't actually see the grass that they're eating. They're feeling the grass that they're eating. So if you can stand back there at their shoulders and have them outside of that 2-foot bubble, but bend around and look at you, how much more comfortable are they going to be? Because they can keep an eye on you. If they're really kind of a watchy horse, you didn't invade that bubble. They can still see you, but they're bent, and they're also now aware that you're aware of them. And I mean, the relaxation just flows out of there. That's a huge tip. It's kind of those one small step for man, but one giant leap for mankind. It's a little bitty thing, but it is powerful.
Absolutely. Well, I think that answers these questions, and leads me to, we're probably heading towards the end of that time frame. So is there any other concluding thoughts you had related to this call and that last question?
No, I think that's all very good stuff. This is all fairly basic. I would say we're not talking about any advanced stuff, but it's also very common. There's a whole lot of people that are fighting these exact kind of issues. I mentioned about building rapport with a horse. These sorts of skills would be very key in that whole scenario of, I can fool with this horse for 10 minutes and then do things on him the owner couldn't. It is because I actually went slower than the owner was, but I got my foot in the door with that horse in a manner that they didn't, because I was watching for his eye and his actual relaxation, and my timing released him at the right points, and I was focusing on his attention on me and whether everything I did relaxed him a little bit. And then I could put my foot on the gas and we actually will go fast. It's about being willing to go slow in the beginning when you're developing that rapport with the horse, focusing on their attention and that they relax with everything you do. A horse should be calm at the end of a training session. They should not be hotter than the way things started. They should be calmer. If they're not, that should be a big red flag to you. And that would be regardless of discipline or event or flat hat or helmet, or none of that matters. You're all dealing with a horse and a horse's brain, and that is the way that it should work out. That's also indicative of the parasympathetic nervous system, where learning actually occurs. And so the people that they're not really aware of that, and they tend to have a horse for long periods of time in the sympathetic nervous system, those horses take way longer to train because they're not in an active learning state. getting that horse to be able to relax and stuff is just super key. People tend to, part of our horse culture right now is that we have conflated going slowly with a virtue, and it's not necessarily a virtue. If your training is going slowly, that can be indicative of it not working very well too. When training is going well, it actually does tend to go pretty fast, but it's kind of the slow is smooth and smooth is fast sort of a path, right? When you try to push it fast, that's when the wheels fall off. But if you're having success with a horse, they should make changes fairly rapidly. If they're not, you're probably trying to take too big of a bite, or you're not paying attention to where their mental state actually is, and you're trying to train a horse that quite literally cannot be trained at this particular moment in time. That should be step one. You got him where he can't be trained, probably better stop everything and get him into a frame of mind where he can be. That should be the priority.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the management strategies and handling strategies for the horses that may be actually proud cut or have stud-like behaviors which lean aggressive and or territorial towards you or other horses.
Okay, so proud cut is one of those terms that we hear used a lot. I don't think people really understand what it is anymore, so I'm going to just define that for you first. When we have a horse gelded or castrated, we're removing the testicles of a male, and everybody understands that. What people don't tend to understand is that the testicles aren't the only thing in there that produces testosterone. So on the cord going up above the testicle, there is a piece called the epididymis, and that is where the sperm cells actually go to mature before they would be included in the semen to be ejaculated and fertilize an egg. And the epididymis also produces testosterone. And it kind of looks like a grub or something up there on that cord. It has three parts to it: the head, the tail, and what's colloquially called the squealer. And it used to be, this is probably going back like to the 60s and 70s, that you might ask your vet, hey, I want him to still be, have that stallion-like behavior, so would you leave him proud cut? And the vet would leave a part of the epididymis on the cord. So the testicles removed, they no longer can produce sperm, they can no longer breed a mare, but there is still a piece in there that will produce testosterone, so they will retain some stallion-like characteristics. Okay, so technically that's what proud cut is. It would be difficult for me to believe that any veterinarian that has an equine concentration and is practicing would do that accidentally. Like it's it's a big deal. You wouldn't do that accidentally. They're normally cutting that cord 6 inches above where the epididymis is. I kind of make it a habit if I'm having a horse gelded, I play dumb and I ask them to point out the 3 parts of the epididymis to me, and that way I know it's on their mind, and they definitely aren't going to leave a little fragment at that point. You will also see these types of behaviors if a horse is castrated later in life. So if you let him become a 6-year-old and he's been a stallion those years, and now you have him gelded, likely he's going to maintain some stallion-like behaviors. Every once in a while, you will get the errant weanling or yearling that is just raring to go years too early. And I would advise you, if you come across one of those, have them gelded ASAP, because that is not going to get better. It is only going to get worse. Okay, now we've defined that. When we go to a horse that has these stallion-like behaviors, I wouldn't treat it any differently than I was talking about the pissy mare that pins her ears and wants to kick at other horses in the beginning. I'm dealing with the behavior. A lot of times people, like when people come to me with a problem horse, they tend to want to give me a 27-minute dissertation on the whole history of the horse. The truth is, I don't care, and I don't need any of that. None of it is relevant. I can't change it. None of it matters. I have a behavior, and now I'm going to work on that behavior. And that's about the simplest form that it is. So if I have a horse that's trying to be territorial with other horses and things like that, I'm going to treat it like I would a Buddy Sour type horse. So I mentioned earlier about having some other horses hobbled in the arena. One of those horses, the one I'm riding, could be a stallion, and one of the hobbled horses could be a mare that's in heat, and she is squatting and peeing and winking, and here we have a situation. Well, if I go lope circles around her for 20 minutes and then I go let him rest in the corner, then I'm making the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult. And if his attention wavers back to her, I could let him go. I could put my hand down and he heads back to her. And then I pick where the bubble is. We get 20 feet from her. Guess what? We're cantering circles again for another 20 minutes, and so on and so forth. And so that's how I would tend to handle that. I will also say this is one of those places where my judgment would come in handy. I know about how long that typically takes to work. If I've been doing that for a couple of weeks and this stallion is just as bad as he was when he started, then I'm going to call the customer and say, hey, I don't think you have a stallion prospect here. I think you've got a horse that really wants to be a gelding, because his mind is never going to be trainable enough. The things we're going to have to do to get this one thinking about what he's thinking it should be thinking about are going to be too extreme. You got an uphill battle here. And so my advice is this one needs to be a gelding. If it is a gelding that I'm riding and we have these kind of behaviors, I mean, there are outliers out there. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we don't really have a choice. What I will say is the worst thing you can do is start isolating that horse from other horses. If let's say I've got a gelding that really wants to be attracted to mares, this is partly where the customer you have comes in handy. If I've got a customer that's okay with horses being horses, then I might make that phone call and say, hey, we need to get about 4 or 5 of my meanest, toughest mares and put your gelding in a paddock with them and let them beat him up for about a week or 2 and teach him some manners. Usually those kinds of horses are the orphaned foal that wasn't raised around other horses and kind of missed out on herd behaviors in the beginning. So it isn't necessarily a stallion-esque problem. It is a I don't know how to be a horse problem. And horses are the best ones to teach him that, not me necessarily. Now, is he going to come out of that process with the same amount of hair that we started that process with? Probably not. But that's okay. That's part of being a horse too. It's not always pretty. And that's the best way that I know to go about it. If you do have a stallion that you're determined to keep a stallion, then bred mares would be the thing to go with, because he can't accidentally impregnate anyone, but he's still going to go in there and act the fool, and they are going to teach him that there is a time to act like a stallion and a time not to. And that's the way to handle stallions. The culture that we have of isolating them and they stay in a stall and every time they see a horse through the window they go crazy. Well, that's the recipe of how you get a horse to be that way. They need to be tied up with the other horses. They need to be turned out with geldings, if nothing else, as often as possible to let them be a horse. They need to be ridden around them. It doesn't need to be a thing. It needs to be perfectly normal that you're going to interact with other horses, and there are standards for how you're going to interact with other horses. And if you don't meet those standards, I'm going to put you to work until you are just panting in the corner begging for a break, and you will learn. And that's kind of the way that I go about that. It's really not about treating them any differently. It's just that they are more strongly motivated, and so you have to tend to do more or do it for longer to kind of crack through that motivation to get them to seeing there's an easier way to live, and they need to do that. So stallions generally are a pain in the butt. Most people have no business owning one. There was a trainer that I apprenticed under, and he had a great saying that they should be like the governor, one in every state. So those are my proud cut and stallion thoughts. So
okay, thank you for those.
All right. Well, Nicole, I want to thank you for for coming on. I hope the viewers will give us a little bit of feedback. This is how I'm planning on doing the Q&As. Nicole has graciously agreed to kind of help out and ask the questions, and that way we can make it a real conversation, and she can ask follow-up questions, and hopefully this makes a little more sense than me just reading stuff and droning on and on. So Nicole, I certainly thank you for coming on. We're also going to have links in the show notes to her stuff, so you can find Nicole on social media and YouTube. She's putting out good content, and it's definitely worth your time to go and listen to. So y'all check her out.
Thank you very much.
Also wanted to tease, I don't remember if I said this at the front end. I don't think I did. But Nicole and I are both board members of the Best Horse Practices Summit, and we'll have some news shortly. There will be another summit coming up this spring. It should be right around Santa Fe, New Mexico. So we'll get to meet face-to-face again at that one. I think this is going to be an even smaller and more intimate one than ones in the past. So if y'all are interested in the kinds of events where you actually get quite a bit of face time with and can talk to the presenters and the clinicians and pick their brain, and it's a lot more of an intimate setting, this is designed to be exactly that. It's not 1,000 faces in a big dome somewhere. It'll be, people you'll remember and so forth in the future. So
you can't hide from the clinicians when you're at the summit.
Yeah, you're gonna have to talk to us one way or another. So, well, Nicole, thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.